Hi all, our second instructive game today will have the theme of slaying the dragon. To demonstrate this theme, I'm going to choose another game from Bilbao, Topalov versus Carlsen, played in round 8. So Topalov kicked off with e4 and Carlsen ventured to play the Sicilian dragon, which is seen today as a risky variation of the Sicilian, because black is immediately weakening potentially these dark squares by playing g6. But not only that, white in the main line is going to get rid of black's fianchettoed bishop. So if white can do that, he'll gain entry points into these dark squares later. So to support that idea of exchanging off black's fianchettoed bishop, white is playing bishop e3 in the main line to follow up with queen d2 and then to be able to play later bishop h6, trading off black's defensive bishop. And a lot of black players, are put off by this plan by white and really don't want to play this, because you're faced with sometimes a very dangerous h-file attack and you can be often, just crushed on the h-file without much of a chance. In this game, Carlsen did play some very inventive, creative moves, but he eventually lost, and it's instructive the way Topalov played the position. So we'll see, after bishop d7, he castled queenside, and Carlsen tried to drum up the usual counterplay with knight e5 to c4, a standard manoeuvre, at least trying to get rid of white's light squared bishop and try and use this c4 outpost on the semi-open c-file. So king b1 and now a6. Seems a bit slow to play a6, maybe there are faster ways of playing the position. White carried on now with a brutal h-file attack, playing h4. Carlsen decided to play h5. This is probably all theory, and white sacrificing now 2 pawns just to try and rip open some lines against Carlsen's king. But actually, interestingly here, he doesn't play anything more radical now. He plays for f4 and f5, but first with rook dg1. So this plan of f4 to f5 is very nice, because in the process he's hoping to try and regain one of his pawns, and once he gets a pawn on f5, that'll present black with a whole new range of difficulties, such as f takes g6 and the pawn maybe threatening to go to f6 in some variations. So rook c5 was played, a standard kind of move, supporting from c5 the h5 knight, which can be critical in some variations to support because of white's threat often of rook takes h5 once the g file is cleared. Bishop h6, so white is carrying on to reduce the defensive pieces around black's king. And now f4, so we see this f4, f5 plan coming into action, and black plays knight c4, so this traditional trade-off on c4, and now f5. So who's better here? Actually, according to Rybka, it's roughly equal, but I wouldn't really like to play black here. This is why the Sicilian dragon's quite a risky opening. I wouldn't really recommend it, although it did serve a great surprise value when Kasparov beat Anand with it in one of the PCA World Championship matches. But in this game, Topalov is playing completely, mainline ideas, sacking 2 pawns, and it seems to be a very aggressive position. In fact, a concession was made now, a radical structural concession by Magnus, playing e5. So he's leaving himself with that backward d pawn, and this provides a permanent liability now for Topalov over the next few moves to combine his kingside attack with attacking that d6 pawn. So we'll see after knight de2, rook h8. Topalov is first careful though to make sure he doesn't get undermined on his e4 pawn. He kicks away that rook, not fearing to weaken his king slightly, because there's no black dark squared bishop, so he doesn't mind playing b3 just to get rid of that pressure on e4. And now he takes the pawn, so he's only a pawn down now, and he's still got a very dangerous attacking position. Carlsen plays knight f6, and after rook gg1 the rooks came off. And now white is threatening actually queen h6 and queen h8 mating. So that's quite an unpleasant threat, and Magnus parries it by playing knight g4, defending that h6 square. And now knight g3 is played. So these knights are both quite kind of useful. I think they're better than knight and bishop at the moment. In fact, Rybka's starting to really like the position here for white. After king g8, knight d5 was played. So potentially there's all sorts of ideas, like playing f6, sacking a pawn temporarily to be able to play queen h6. This knight's very dangerous, and Carlsen played rook c5. I'm not really sure the intention. Maybe it's just to vacate the square to play able to play bishop c6. He's not really going to be playing rook takes d5 as an exchange sack here. Topalov actually played knight e3, so he wants to get rid of black's knight. These trade of knights will further weaken the black king, and we see here in this position it is starting to look a bit wretched for Magnus, because not only is king's much weaker than before without that knight, you know, white's got some dangerous pieces poised to try and get into his king position, especially the queen and rook coordinating very well together here. After queen f6, Magnus is desperately trying to, you know, stave off these threats by using his queen on the dark squares. But, you know, unfortunately, after queen g5, there were very unpleasant threats here, like f6. And so Magnus is forcing Magnus to play yet another concession, to play f6. And now this is really wretched, because, you know, this g-file is now going to be extremely dangerous after this queen d2. Not only attacking that vulnerable d6 pawn, but now white potentially is going to be playing in some lines f takes g6 and either knight f5 or knight h5. Magnus plays rook c6. Topalov just chose king b2, further consolidating his position a bit. And after g takes f5, you know, Magnus is the one opening the g-file against his own king. And knight takes f5 would have been playable, I believe, but actually Topalov played the even stronger potentially move, although they're about the same, I think. Queen a5 is also very dangerous for the black king. And now Magnus defended d8 with queen e7, but after queen d5, bishop e6, the queen goes now back to d1, so potentially supporting rook g1s. Queen g7, and now e takes f5. The knight can't be taken because of rook g1 skewering the queen against the king. And now the knight is threatening, as well as going to h5, to go simply to e4 positionally to attack that d6 pawn. So after bishop f7, Magnus rules out h5, so the knight goes to e4. And how is Magnus defending now? d6, as well as f6. He actually drops the d6 pawn now, and it's all pretty hopeless from here, because white now, after queen d2, is threatening queen b4 check, among other things. And this endgame, after rook d1, knight d6, white just swapped off now into a winning rook and pawn endgame, because after something like rook d5, b4, c5, it's going to be very difficult to stop these pawns. So Magnus has had enough now and resigned. Let's have an overview and summary of this game to see that Topalov strategy again against the Sicilian dragon. It will be useful to be able to know this pattern, to be able to play in our own games, and it looks to be a very, you know, aggressive treatment to do a double pawn sacrifice first with this g pawn, then with the h pawn, and then to play for this f4 f5 plan, keeping the pawn islands intact as well. Seems kind of nice, and this f5 pawn wedge kind of dangerous once it reaches f5. But Topalov was careful not to allow too much counterplay, either with the knight g3s earlier by playing rook g1, but also now kicking soon that rook on c4 to avoid any pressure on e4 before resuming his attack. So he's only a pawn down now, and he's still got attack potential on both the king side and also black's d6 pawn, which he was forced to concede as a permanent structural weakness. So we see now Topalov is keen actually to remove yet another defensive piece away from Magnus, further weakening the black king position in these variations, but also using the simultaneous threats on d6 and the h-file to gain a winning position. So a very professional approach to winning, not just trying to hack Magnus up, but being content just to win the endgame if you can just win that d6 pawn, which is after all a backward pawn in the semi-open file. So in this position, another entry point into the black king position, this a5 square, is curious and distinctive of this game. And with this queen a5, the queen was going all over the place, back to d1. So it's amazing these movements, and they bring white a clear advantage now, because after this knight e4, finally, you know, white is really positionally crushing black, as well as the king's safety being an issue. The d6 pawn is just a major, you know, virtually unsolvable issue. If black, by the way, had done d5 here, then just rook g1. So, you know, it's simultaneously these threats which Magnus has to try and escape with his king to get off the g-file, just losing that d6 pawn and just heading basically for this lost endgame. Here, by the way, the rook was immune because it's a mating 2 with queen d6 and then queen d8. So really this was a helpless position, and the rook and pawn ending is just hopeless. So here Magnus resigned. It has dented perhaps the reputation of the dragon a little bit more by providing a convenient demonstration to us of how to beat this system. You know, the double pawn sack, the invasion point on a5, trying just to provoke black to get this backward d6 pawn. So there were various things in there which make this main sort of way of playing against the dragon, casting queenside, look even more attractive than the negative reputation the dragon already had. I hope you enjoyed that video, and please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.